The blue-green world of Kepler. 442 be burned against the darkness of space. What had once been a peaceful planet filled with crystal cities and floating gardens was now a dying ember. Commander Zefka watched from his command center as the last of his people fled underground, their beautiful civilization crumbling around them. "Sir, the dark ships are moving into final position," reported his communications officer, her voice shaking with fear. Through the transparent walls of their command dome, massive black vessels hung in the sky like hungry predators. Each ship was larger than their greatest cities, and there were dozens of them. Zefka had lived for 300 years, had seen his people reach for the stars and touch the face of their gods through science and art. The Zephyrians had never known war, had never built weapons meant to kill. They were philosophers, artists, and dreamers. When the dark ships first appeared at the edge of their system, they had tried to welcome them with music and poetry. The strangers had responded with death. How long until the evacuation transports reached the hidden colonies? Zefka asked, though he already knew the answer would not bring hope. 2 hours, sir. But the enemy ships are already targeting our escape routes. Through the dome, Zefka could see the strange soldiers of the enemy moving through his city streets. They walked in perfect lines, their bodies covered in dark armor that seemed to swallow light itself. Some looked like his own people. Others were different species entirely, but they all moved with the same cold purpose. Behind their helmets, their eyes glowed with an unnatural blue light. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet," the communications officer said, her hands dancing over the crystal controls. "They're speaking our language." "Put it through." A voice filled the command center, cold and empty of emotion. "Zephyrian leadership, you will surrender all remaining population centers. Your species has been judged and found wanting. You will be processed for integration into the hegemony or face elimination." Zefka felt his heart pounding. In all their history, his people had never encountered such cruelty. They had met other species among the stars, had traded songs and stories, had learned and taught in equal measure. But these beings offered only 2 choices, slavery or death. "Sir, what should we tell them?" Zefka looked at his young officer. She had been born in the Crystal Gardens, had never seen violence until 3 days ago when the dark ships arrived. Her parents were probably dead now, along with most of their people. The enemy called themselves the hegemony, and they had been very clear about what they wanted. "Tell them we refuse," Zefka said quietly. "Tell them the Zephyrians choose to die free rather than live as slaves." The communications officer nodded, tears flowing down her face as she sent the message. Within moments, the dark ships began to move. Beams of red light lanced down from space, turning entire districts into glass. The air filled with the sound of breaking crystal and dying voices. "Sir, our deep space sensors are picking up something," another officer called out. "There's a patrol ship in the outer system. It's not one of ours." "Enemy reinforcements?" "No, sir. The signature is different. It's small, maybe a scout ship from another species." Zefka felt a spark of hope. If another species could witness what was happening here, perhaps they could warn others. Perhaps his people's deaths would not be meaningless. "Can we reach them?" "Not directly, but we can launch a message beacon. If we encode it with our fastest quantum encryption, it might reach them before the hegemony notices." "Do it. Tell them everything. Show them what the hegemony really is." His officers worked frantically as the city died around them. The message beacon was their most advanced technology, capable of traveling faster than light itself. Into its memory cores, they loaded everything they knew about their attackers: ship designs, weapon signatures, tactical patterns, and most importantly, the truth about what the hegemony did to conquered species. The blue light in the enemy soldiers' eyes was not natural. It was a mark of control, of minds stripped away and replaced with artificial loyalty. The hegemony did not just conquer worlds, they stole souls. "Beacon ready for launch, sir." "Send it. Aim for the patrol ship's projected path. Maybe they'll find it, maybe they won't, but at least we'll have tried." The beacon shot away from their dying world, a tiny spark of light, carrying the last words of an entire civilization. Zefka watched it disappear into the darkness, then turned back to his people. Sir, the enemy is demanding our surrender again. Tell them the same thing. Tell them we are Zephyrians and we bow to no one. The red beams intensified. The Crystal Command Center began to crack and melt around them. Through the breaking walls, Zefka could see his beautiful world dying. The floating gardens were falling from the sky like burning tears. The great libraries were becoming pillars of flame. Everything his people had built over thousands of years was being erased in a single day. But they would not be forgotten. Not if the beacon found its way to someone who would listen. Sir, structural integrity is failing. We need to evacuate. No, Zefka said firmly. We stay. We bear witness until the end. His officers nodded, understanding. They were the last government of their people, the final voice of Zephyrian civilization. They would not run and hide while their world burned. The command center shook as another beam struck nearby. Through the cracking dome, Zefka could see the dark ships moving into lower orbit. Soon they would begin the final bombardment, the one that would crack the planet's crust and boil away its oceans. Has anyone ever stopped them? Asked his young communications officer. In all our records of the galaxy, has anyone ever defeated hegemony? Zefka searched his memory, thinking of all the dead worlds they had discovered in their explorations, all the silent ruins that spoke of vanished peoples. No, he said quietly. No one has ever stopped them. They are too strong, too many, too organized. Then who will stop them after us? It was a question that would haunt Zefka in his final moments. Somewhere out there, the beacon raced through space, carrying their warning to whoever might find it. Perhaps it would reach someone strong enough, stubborn enough, or crazy enough to stand against a hegemony. Perhaps it would find its way to someone who had never learned to surrender. The command center exploded in light and heat. Zefka's last thought was a prayer to whatever gods might listen. Let someone find our message. Let someone stop them. In the darkness of space, the beacon continued its journey toward an unknown destination. Lieutenant Amy Collins rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the data streaming across her screens. For 6 months, she had been working at Deep Space Station Alpha, monitoring the endless chatter of the galaxy. Most days brought nothing but cosmic radiation and the occasional merchant ship transmission. Today was different. Control, I'm picking up something weird on quantum band, she said into her headset. Looks like a message beacon, but it's using encryption I've never seen before. Origin point, came the voice of Commander Lisa Hayes from the main control room. That's the strange part. Trajectory analysis suggests it came from the Kepler 442 system. But according to our records, that system went dark 6 months ago. Amy had been tracking deep space signals for 3 years. She knew the difference between natural phenomena and artificial transmissions. This beacon was definitely artificial, and it was trying very hard to be noticed. The quantum signature was unlike anything in their databases, but was clearly designed to be decoded by any sufficiently advanced species. I'm running it through a translation matrix now, Amy said, her fingers flying over the controls. The computer systems at Deep Space Station Alpha were the most advanced humanity had ever built, designed to decode and translate signals from across the galaxy. If anyone could crack this message, they could. The first images that appeared on her screen made Amy's blood run cold. Beautiful crystal cities burning under red beams of light. Strange soldiers with glowing blue eyes marching through streets filled with bodies. Massive black ships hanging in space like mechanical vultures. Control, you need to see this right now. Within minutes, Commander Hayes was standing behind Amy's chair, watching the horrific images unfold. The beacon contained not just pictures, but detailed technical data, tactical analyses, and historical records going back thousands of years. It painted a picture of systematic genocide on a galactic scale. My God, Hayes whispered. How many worlds? According to this data, over 200 civilizations have been destroyed in the past 10,000 years, Amy said, her voice shaking. The beings responsible call themselves the hegemony. They show up, demand surrender, and if they don't get it, they kill everyone. The beacon's creators, the Zephyrians, had included everything they knew about their attackers. Ship designs, weapon capabilities, tactical patterns, and most disturbing of all, the truth about what happened to survivors. The hegemony didn't just conquer. They converted the conquered into mindless soldiers, stripping away their free will and turning them into weapons against other worlds. Amy, I need you to copy everything to the main database and send it directly to Earth Command. Priority 1, eyes only for the Joint Chiefs. Already on it, ma'am. Hayes paced the small control room, her mind racing. As a commanding officer of humanity's most remote monitoring station, she had always known that first contact with alien life would be her responsibility. She had imagined many scenarios: peaceful traders, curious explorers, even hostile invaders. She had never imagined anything like this. Amy, based on the beacon's trajectory and the timeline in the data, when do you think Kepler 442b was attacked? Amy ran the calculations, checking and double-checking her work. 6 months ago, ma'am. Right around the time the system went dark. And how long would it take for a fleet moving at the speeds described in these files to reach Earth? Amy's hands froze over her keyboard. She ran the calculation 3 times, hoping she was wrong. 18 months, ma'am. Maybe less if they have faster ships than the ones described here. 3 weeks later. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room of the UHS Defiance, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. Around him sat the representatives of every major nation on Earth, their faces grim as they absorbed the intelligence from the Zephyrian beacon. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Admiral Frank Stone, "we are facing an extinction-level threat. Based on our analysis of the Kepler 442b data, we have perhaps 12 months before the hegemony fleet reaches our solar system." The room erupted in whispered conversations and worried murmurs. Morrison had read the files, had seen the images of dead worlds and enslaved populations. The hegemony was unlike any enemy humanity had ever faced. They weren't interested in territory or resources. They were interested in absolute control. "What are our options?" asked the representative from the European Federation. Admiral Stone activated a holographic display showing Earth's current military capabilities. "We have 37 active warships, various orbital defense platforms, and approximately 2 million military personnel across all branches. Under normal circumstances, this would be considered a formidable force. And under these circumstances, we're outgunned, outmanned, and outclassed by an enemy that has been perfecting their war machine for 10,000 years. Morrison stood up. At 35, he was young for a starship captain, but he had earned his rank through skill and determination. "Admiral, what about unconventional tactics?" "The Zephyrian data suggests that the hegemony follows very predictable battle patterns." "Explain." "They're used to overwhelming technological superiority. They show up, demonstrate their power, demand surrender, and when they don't get it, they systematically destroy all resistance. But they've been using the same playbook for millennia. Maybe that's a weakness we can exploit." Stone nodded slowly. "What are you proposing, Captain?" "We can't beat them in a straight fight, but we might be able to make them pay a price they're not expecting. Hit-and-run tactics, guerrilla warfare in space. Force them to adapt to something they've never seen before." The Chinese representative leaned forward. "You're talking about sacrificing our fleet to buy time." "Time for what?" Morrison looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Some showed fear, others determination, but all of them were looking for hope. Time to find their weakness. According to the Zephyrian data, the hegemony uses conquered species as soldiers. That means there are beings in their fleet who were once free, who might remember what freedom feels like. You're suggesting we can turn their own forces against them? I'm suggesting we make them remember that freedom is worth fighting for. Over the following months, humanity prepared for war like never before. The old divisions between nations crumbled as Earth's governments pooled their resources and knowledge. Scientists worked around the clock to develop new weapons and defenses. Military leaders studied every piece of Zephyrian intelligence, looking for any advantage they could find. Captain Morrison found himself in command of not just the Defiance, but humanity's entire strategy. It was a responsibility that kept him awake at night, staring out at the stars and wondering if they would still be free when the sun rose. The crew of the Defiance was made up of the best humanity had to offer. Commander Hayes, his first officer and tactical expert. Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez, who could keep any machine running against impossible odds. Dr. Helen Burke, whose knowledge of alien biology might prove crucial if they encountered hegemony forces. Captain, Amy Collins said, entering his ready room with a data pad. She had been reassigned to Defiance as their communications specialist after her discovery of the beacon. Long-range sensors are picking up gravitational anomalies at the edge of the system, multiple large objects moving in formation. Morrison felt his heart sink. How long until they reach Earth? At their current speed, 6 days. Morrison activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. The hegemony fleet has been detected at the edge of our solar system. All crews to battle stations. This is not a drill. As alarms echoed through the corridors of the Defiance, Morrison looked out at the stars one more time. Somewhere out there, a fleet of world killers was coming to Earth. Humanity's time of peace was over. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. The hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of mechanical locusts. 12 massive dreadnoughts, each one larger than any structure humanity had ever built, took position at the edge of the solar system. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb light itself, creating holes in the starfield where they hung in formation. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance, watching the sensor readings with growing dread. Each enemy ship was easily 5 kilometers long and bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Behind them came smaller vessels by the hundreds, forming a wall of death that stretched across space. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Ben Carter from a navigation station. At 23, he was the youngest officer on the bridge, fresh out of the academy and facing his first real combat situation. "How many of them are there?" "Computer shows 417 vessels total," reported Commander Lisa Hayes from the tactical station. "The large ships each carry enough firepower to sterilize a continent." Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. Somewhere behind that alien fleet was Earth, with its 8 billion people who had no idea that their world was about to be judged by creatures who had been destroying civilizations since before humanity learned to write. "Open a channel to the fleet. All ships stand ready but do not power weapons. We try diplomacy first." Amy Collins worked at her communication station, establishing contact with the 36 other human warships spread throughout the system. They were pathetically outnumbered, but they were all that stood between the hegemony and Earth. "Channel open, sir." Morrison took a deep breath. "Unknown vessels. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Human Space Forces. Welcome to the Sol System. We request immediate communication to discuss your presence in our territory." The response came faster than expected. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a figure that made everyone on the bridge step back in shock. It appeared to be human, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was pale gray. Its eyes glowed with the same blue light they had seen in the Zephyrin recordings, and when it spoke, its voice was emotionless and cold. "Human leadership, I am designation. Commander Prime of Hegemony Fleet Tertius. Your species will undergo evaluation according to Hegemony Protocol 77 Alpha. You have 1 rotation of your primary star to prepare your population centers for processing." Processing. Morrison felt his blood turn cold. "We're not looking for any kind of processing. We're a peaceful species. We can discuss trade agreements, cultural exchange, anything you might need. Your response indicates misunderstanding of hegemony purpose. We do not trade. We do not exchange. We evaluate and integrate or eliminate. Your species will surrender all military assets and population centers for processing into hegemony structure. Resistance will result in immediate termination." The communication ended abruptly. Morrison stared at the dark screen, his mind racing. Everything the Zephyrians had warned about was happening exactly as they had described. The hegemony wasn't interested in negotiation or diplomacy. They saw other species as resources to be harvested or obstacles to be removed. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command," Amy reported. "Admiral Stone wants to speak with you immediately." "Put him through." Admiral Frank Stone's weathered face appeared on a smaller screen. Behind him, Morrison could see the chaos of Earth's military command center as officers scrambled to coordinate humanity's desperate defense. "Jake, what's your assessment?" "They're exactly what the Zephyrians described, sir. No interest in negotiation, no compromise. They've given us 24 hours to surrender or face termination. And if we surrender? Morrison thought of the images from the beacon, the conquered soldiers with their glowing blue eyes marching through burning cities. Then humanity ceases to exist as a free species. They'll turn us into slaves, strip away everything that makes us human. Stone nodded grimly. That's what I thought. All right, Jake, we're implementing Plan Delta. You'll have tactical command of all fleet elements. Make them pay for every inch of space. Understood, sir. The next 18 hours passed in tense preparation. Human ships took position throughout the solar system, using asteroids and debris fields for cover. The plan was simple in its desperation. Hit the enemy hard and fast, then scatter before they could respond with overwhelming force. Morrison barely slept, spending the time reviewing tactical data and saying goodbye to Earth in his own way. He recorded a message for his sister, knowing he would probably never see her again. All around him, his crew did the same. When the deadline passed, the hegemony's response was swift and terrible. The first target was Mars, with its sprawling colonies and terraforming stations. Red beams lanced out from the lead dreadnought, and within minutes, 3 million people were dead. They're demonstrating their power, Commander Hayes said, her voice tight with controlled anger, just like they did with every other species. The second target was the Jupiter mining platforms. Another beam, another flash of light, another few 100,000 human lives ended in an instant. Morrison watched good people die and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. All ships, this is Morrison, execute Plan Delta. Show these bastards what happens when you threaten humanity. The human fleet attacked from 6 different directions simultaneously. Missiles and energy weapons filled space with deadly light as Earth's warships closed with the enemy. For a few glorious minutes, it looked like they might have a chance. The UHS Columbia scored a direct hit on a hegemony cruiser, punching through its dark armor and sending the alien ship spinning out of formation. The European vessel Excalibur managed to destroy 3 enemy fighters before they could react. All across the battlefield, human courage and determination met alien technology. But it wasn't enough. The hegemony responded with methodical precision, their weapons cutting through human shields like paper. Morrison watched helplessly as the Columbia exploded, taking her crew of 300 with her. The Excalibur lasted 30 seconds longer before a massive beam weapon reduced her to glowing particles. "Sir, we're losing ships too fast," reported Lieutenant Carter, his young face pale with shock. "The Wellington's gone, the Tokyo is venting atmosphere, and the New York is requesting immediate evacuation." Morrison gripped his command chair as the bridge shook from a near miss. Around him, his crew worked with desperate efficiency, but the mathematics of the battle were simple and brutal. The human fleet was being systematically destroyed. All remaining ships, this is Morrison, execute withdrawal pattern Omega. Get out of here while you still can. "Sir, we can't abandon Earth," protested Commander Hayes. "We're not abandoning anything. We're regrouping. A dead fleet can't protect anyone." One by one, the surviving human ships broke off from combat and scattered throughout the solar system. Behind them, the hegemony fleet reformed their perfect formations and began the slow advance toward Earth. Morrison watched his homeworld growing larger on the screen, a blue jewel hanging in the darkness. Somewhere down there, 8 billion people were looking up at the stars and praying that their protectors would find a way to save them. The Defiance was alone now, the last human warship between the enemy and Earth. Morrison's crew looked to him for orders, for some miracle that would turn the tide of battle. All he had to offer was determination, and the knowledge that sometimes the only choice left was to make the enemy pay a price for their victory. "Amy, open a channel to the hegemony fleet." "Channel open, sir." "Commander Prime, this is Captain Morrison. You want our world? Come and take it." The alien face appeared on screen again, its glowing eyes showing no emotion. "Human vessel, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed." Morrison smiled coldly. "We don't surrender. We don't bow down to anyone. And we sure as hell don't let monsters like you take our home without a fight. Then you will die. Maybe, but we'll make sure you remember us." The communication ended. Morrison turned to his crew, seeing fear and determination in equal measure on their faces. They were about to face impossible odds with no chance of victory, but they were ready. All right, people, let's show them what humanity is made of. Captain Jake Morrison had been running and fighting for 3 weeks, and he was getting very good at both. The UHS Defiance darted through the asteroid belt like a metal ghost, using the rocky debris to hide from the hegemony sensors that swept constantly through space. Contact bearing 27 Mark 15, reported Lieutenant Ben Carter from a navigation station. His voice was steadier now than it had been during the first battle. 3 weeks of constant combat had aged him years, but it also made him one of the best tactical officers Morrison had ever seen. Enemy composition: 2 cruisers and 4 escort vessels. Standard patrol formation. Morrison smiled grimly. He had been studying hegemony tactics for weeks now, and their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They were incredibly organized, following the same battle patterns they had perfected over 10,000 years of conquest. They expected their enemies to fight like civilized beings, following logical tactical doctrine. Humanity, Morrison had discovered, was not particularly civilized when backed into a corner. Amy, any chatter on their communication channels? Lieutenant Amy Collins worked at her communication station, listening to the alien transmissions that filled local space. Same as always, sir. Very formal, very precise. They're requesting updated targeting data from their command ship. Time to shake things up. Tony, how are our engines? Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez appeared on the bridge view screen, his uniform stained with grease and his face, showing the strain of keeping the ship running under impossible conditions. We've got about 60% power on the main drives, Captain. That jury-rigged plasma conduit is holding, but I wouldn't want to stress it too much. Define too much. Well, sir, it'll probably hold together for normal operations, maybe even some light combat maneuvering. But if you're planning another one of your crazy stunts. Morrison's crazy stunts had become legendary among the surviving crew. In the past 3 weeks, he had used the Defiance to take out 6 hegemony vessels, including 2 cruisers and a supply ship. He did it by refusing to fight fair. The first time, he had hidden the ship inside a dead comet, waiting until a hegemony patrol came close enough to touch before opening fire. The second time, he had used the gravitational field of a gas giant to slingshot around behind an enemy formation, hitting them from an angle they never expected. Each victory caused the hegemony ships and forced them to adapt their tactics, which was exactly what Morrison wanted. The more unpredictable he became, the more resources they had to devote to hunting him down. Commander Hayes, what's our torpedo situation? Lisa Hayes checked her tactical display. 18 quantum torpedoes remaining, plus conventional missiles. Enough for maybe 2 more engagements if we're careful. Since when have we been careful? Hayes smiled, the first genuine expression of humor Morrison had seen from her in days. Good point, sir. The plan that Morrison outlined to his senior staff was insane even by their recent standards. The hegemony patrol was moving through a dense asteroid field, following a predictable search pattern. Morrison intended to use that predictability against them. We're going to let them find us, he said, pointing to the tactical display. Amy, I want you to send a distress signal on an emergency frequency, something that looks like engine failure. Make it sloppy, like we're trying to hide but not doing a very good job. That's going to bring them running, sir. Exactly. Ben, plot us a course through these asteroids here. I want maximum cover, but make sure we have an escape route. Sir, that path goes right through the densest part of the field. One wrong move and we'll be pasted on a rock. Then don't make any wrong moves. An hour later, the Defiance was drifting among the asteroids, her engines powered down and her hull scarred from weeks of running battles. To hegemony sensors, she looked like a damaged ship trying to hide from superior forces, which was exactly what Morrison wanted them to think. Enemy formation is altering course, Carter reported. They're moving to intercept. Perfect. Now we wait. Morrison watched the hegemony ships approach on his tactical display. 6 vessels moving in perfect formation, confident in their superiority. They had destroyed hundreds of civilizations using these same tactics, overwhelming their enemies with superior firepower and discipline. They had never faced an enemy that fought dirty. Range. For 1,000 kilometers in closing, Hayes reported. Hold position. 3,000 kilometers. Hold. 2,000. Sir, they'll have us in weapons range in 30 seconds. Let them get closer. The hegemony cruisers were massive vessels, easily 3 times the size of Defiance. Their dark hulls bristled with weapons that could punch through any armor humanity had ever developed. Under normal circumstances, engaging 2 of them would be suicide. Morrison had stopped believing in normal circumstances 3 weeks ago. 1,000 kilometers. Sir, they're powering weapons. Now, Tony, full power to engines. The Defiance exploded out of her hiding place among the asteroids, her engines blazing with plasma fire. But instead of trying to escape, Morrison aimed straight for the center of a hegemony formation. Sir, we're on a collision course. Carter shouted, I'm counting on it. Amy, broadcast this on all frequencies. This is Captain Morrison. You want to judge humanity? Judge this. The hegemony ships tried to adjust their formation, but they were moving too fast and too close together. The Defiance shot between the 2 cruisers like a bullet, her hull scraping against their shields. Morrison could feel the deck plates vibrating as enemy weapons tried to lock onto his ship. Then they were through and the real attack began. Fire everything. All tubes, all batteries. The Defiance's quantum torpedoes and missile pods opened fire simultaneously, launching their deadly cargo not the enemy ships, but at the asteroid around them. Massive chunks of rock and metal exploded outward, creating a storm of debris that filled local space. The hegemony formation, designed for open space combat, suddenly found itself flying blind through a cloud of spinning death. Their perfect discipline became a liability as ships crashed into asteroids or each other trying to maintain formation. Direct hit on cruiser number 2. Hayes shouted over chaos. Their shields are down. Morrison didn't waste the opportunity. Tony, ramming speed. Aim for their engine section. Sir, if we hit them at this velocity, we'll destroy ourselves too. Not if we're smarter than they are. Ben, emergency stop in 3, 2, 1 mark. The Defiance's engines reverse thrust at the last possible second, bringing the ship to a violent halt just as the damaged hegemony cruiser slammed into a massive asteroid. The alien vessel crumpled like paper. Its hull breached in a dozen places. 1 down, 5 to go, Morrison said, watching the enemy ship's death throes on his screen. Around them, the remaining hegemony vessels were trying to regroup, but the asteroid field made it impossible for them to use their superior numbers effectively. Sir, the surviving cruiser is trying to get target lock on us, Hayes reported. Then let's not give them time to shoot. Amy, patch me through to all hegemony ships. Channel open. Morrison looked directly at the view screen, knowing that somewhere out there, alien commanders were listening to his words. This is Captain Morrison of the UHS Defiance. You've been hunting us for 3 weeks, and so far you've got nothing to show for it but dead ships and confused tactical reports. You want to know why? Because you've been fighting the same way for 10,000 years, and we've been improvising for 3 weeks. He paused, watching the enemy formation struggle to adapt to his unconventional tactics. Here's something for your databases. Humans don't follow rules when we're fighting for our lives. We cheat, we improvise, and we never, ever give up. Every ship you send after us is 1 less ship threatening Earth. So keep coming. We got plenty more surprises. The communication ended, and Morrison turned back to his crew. They were staring at him with a mixture of admiration and concern, as if they weren't sure whether their captain was brilliant or completely insane. Maybe both, Morrison thought, but it was working. Over the next hour, the Defiance played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the remaining hegemony ships. Morrison used every dirty trick he could think of, from hiding behind asteroid shadows to using debris as improvised weapons. When conventional tactics failed, he invented new ones on the spot. By the time the engagement was over, 3 more enemy vessels had been destroyed, and the survivors were limping back to their main fleet with damage reports and tactical data that made no sense according to their established doctrine. Sir, long-range sensors show hegemony reinforcements heading our way. Carter reported. "Looks like a full battle group this time." Morrison nodded. Each victory cost the enemy resources and forced them to commit more ships to hunting him down. It was a war of attrition that he couldn't win, but every day he stayed alive was another day that Earth remained free. Set course for the outer asteroid belt. Let's see if we can find some new rocks to hide behind. As the Defiance disappeared into the darkness, Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The hegemony was learning that humanity was unlike any enemy they had faced before. And he was just getting started. Dr. Helen Burke crouched in the dark corridor of the captured hegemony supply ship, her medical scanner painting eerie green light across the alien bulkheads. Around her, Sergeant Mike Thompson's Marines secured the vessel, while Captain Morrison and his boarding party searched for intelligence that might give humanity an edge in their impossible war. "Doc, what are you seeing?" Thompson asked quietly, his rifle trained on the shadows ahead. Burke studied the readings on her scanner, her heart racing as she began to understand what they meant. "Mike, these aren't aliens. Not originally, anyway." She had been examining the bodies of fallen hegemony soldiers for the past hour, and each discovery had been more disturbing than the last. What she initially thought were different species were actually the same species, modified beyond recognition by advanced cybernetic implants. "What do you mean?" "Look at this," Burke said, kneeling beside one of the fallen soldiers. She activated her portable medical kit, the bright lights revealing details that had been hidden in the gloom. The bone structure, the muscle arrangement, even the basic neural pathways. This being was one similar to the Zephyrians we saw in the beacon data. Thompson moved closer, keeping his weapon ready. "So the hegemony recruited them?" "No, Mike. They converted them. These implants aren't just technology. They're control devices. Look at the neural interface here." She pointed to a complex web of circuitry that ran along the creature's skull and down its spine. This technology is suppressing the original personality, replacing it with artificial loyalty. The implications of her discovery sent cold fear through Burke's chest. Every hegemony soldier they had fought was an invader. They were victims. Entire species enslaved and turned into weapons against other worlds. "Captain Morrison, please report to the medical bay immediately," she said into her communicator. Minutes later, Morrison arrived with Commander Hayes and their newest crew member, tech specialist Nina Walsh. Walsh was a former computer programmer who had joined them after the destruction of the defense station at Titan. Her expertise in alien technology had already proven invaluable. "What have you found, Helen?" Morrison asked. Burke led them to her makeshift examination area, where she had laid out the evidence of her discoveries. "Jake, the hegemony isn't a species. It's a system. These soldiers were all different races originally, but they've been modified with cybernetic implants that control their minds." She activated her scanner, showing them the complex neural networks that have been installed in each specimen. The technology is incredibly sophisticated. It doesn't just control behavior. It suppresses memory, emotion, and individual thought. These beings have been turned into biological robots. Morrison stared at the readings, his jaw clenched with anger. "How many species are represented here?" "At least 12 that I can identify from these samples alone. And based on the variation in the implant technology, I'd say the hegemony has been perfecting this process for thousands of years." Nina Walsh leaned over the scanner readings, her programmer's mind already working on the technical implications. "Dr. Burke, are you saying these implants are what's creating the blue glow we see in their eyes?" "Exactly. The glow is a byproduct of the neural control system. It's like a status light showing that the implants are active and functioning." Morrison looked up from the data. "Helen, if these are control devices, is there any way to disrupt them?" Burke and Walsh exchanged glances. It was the question they had both been thinking about since the discovery. "Maybe," Burke said slowly. "The implants appear to use a quantum entanglement system for coordination. If we could find the source signal, we might be able to create interference." Walsh finished. "Like jamming a radio frequency, but on a quantum level." Hayes leaned forward. "What would that do to the control beings?" "I don't know," Burke admitted. "Best case scenario, it might restore their original personalities. Worst case, it could kill them instantly. The neural damage from prolonged control might be irreversible. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing the moral implications of what they were discussing. They were talking about potentially liberating thousands of enslaved beings, but the process might destroy them in the attempt. Nina, how will we even begin to create that kind of interference? Walsh pulled out her portable computer, her fingers flying over the interface as she ran calculations. We need access to a hegemony command ship, something with a direct link to their control network. And we need to understand their quantum encryption protocols. And we need to get close enough to upload the disruption signal without being blown to pieces. Hayes added. Over the next several hours, the team worked frantically to develop their plan. Burke continued her analysis of the hegemony soldiers, mapping the implant systems and looking for weaknesses. Walsh studied the captured computer data from the supply ship, trying to understand how the control network functioned. Morrison coordinated with his remaining crew, planning what might be humanity's most desperate gambit yet. The good news, Walsh announced during their emergency briefing, is that I've been able to decode some of their basic communication protocols. The hegemony uses a hierarchical command structure, with individual ships linked to regional command vessels, with a link to a central control network. And the bad news? Morrison asked. The central control network is located on their primary command ship, which is approximately 10 kilometers long and protected by shields that could deflect a small moon. Morrison looked at the tactical display, showing the hegemony fleet positions. The command ship hung in space near Jupiter like a small metal planet, surrounded by dozens of escort vessels. Getting close to it would be suicide under normal circumstances. But Morrison had stopped believing in normal circumstances months ago. Helen, how long would it take to prepare your disruption signal? If Nina's calculations are correct, maybe 6 hours to write the code and prepare the upload system. Nina, I could have the quantum virus ready in 4 hours, assuming Dr. Burke's biological data is accurate. Morrison nodded. Do it, both of you. We're going to infiltrate that command ship and free every enslaved mind in their fleet. Sergeant Thompson spoke up from the back of the room. Sir, with respect, that's completely insane. We'd be flying straight into the heart of their formation with no support and no chance of escape. Mike's right, Hayes added. Even if we somehow managed to get aboard their command ship, we'd never make out alive. Morrison looked around at his crew, seeing fear and doubt in their faces. They had followed him through weeks of impossible battles, had trusted him when conventional wisdom said they should surrender or run. Now he was asking them to trust him one more time. You're both right, he said quietly. This is insane, and we probably won't survive it. But think about what Helen discovered today. Every enemy soldier we've been fighting was once a free being with hopes and dreams and families. The hegemony didn't just conquer them, they stole their souls. He stood up, moving to the viewport that showed the stars beyond. Somewhere out there are thousands of species that have been turned into weapons against their will. If we can free them, if we can turn the hegemony's own forces against their masters, we might actually have a chance to win this war. Morrison turned back to his crew. I'm not ordering anyone to come with me. This is volunteer only. But I'm going, because the alternative is watching humanity become another collection of blue-eyed slaves marching through the galaxy. One by one, every member of his crew stepped forward. Burke, Walsh, Thompson, Hayes, Carter, Collins, all of them choosing to follow their captain into what would almost certainly be their final mission. All right, then, Morrison said, feeling pride swell in his chest. Let's go steal a command ship and free a galaxy. As the Defiance prepared for its most dangerous mission yet, Morrison allowed himself one moment of hope. They were about to attempt something that the hegemony would never expect, turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. If they succeeded, the war for galactic freedom was about to take a very different turn. If they failed, humanity would die fighting for something bigger than themselves. Either way, Morrison thought, they would face their fate as free beings. The planning continued through the night as the small human ship prepared to challenge an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. In the medical bay, Burke worked to understand the full extent of the hegemony's crimes against the conquered species. In the computer lab, Walsh wrote code that could potentially liberate millions of enslaved minds. And on the bridge, Morrison stared out at the stars and wondered if they were about to save the galaxy or die trying. Maybe both. The UHS Defiance materialized inside the Hegemony command ship's hangar bay in a flash of twisted space and screaming metal. Captain Jake Morrison had pushed their experimental jump drive beyond all safety limits, but it had worked. They were inside the enemy's most protected vessel, 10 kilometers deep in the heart of their fleet. Alarms immediately filled the massive hangar as the Defiance's hull scraped against alien deck plating. Emergency force fields snapped into place, trapping the human ship inside the bay while Hegemony security forces rushed to respond to the impossible intrusion. All hands, we are go for Operation Liberation, Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. Nina, Helen, get to the central computer core. Mike, secure our exit route. Everyone else with me. The boarding ramp dropped, and Morrison led his team into hell. The Hegemony command ship was a maze of dark corridors and pulsing lights, designed for beings who had forgotten what freedom looked like. The walls were covered with screens showing tactical data and fleet positions, all monitored by enslaved beings whose eyes glowed with the cold blue light of artificial loyalty. Sergeant Mike Thompson and his Marines moved like shadows through the ship's corridors, their weapons cutting down any resistance they encountered. But Morrison noticed something that made his heart ache. Many of the Hegemony soldiers hesitated before firing, as if some part of their original personality was fighting against their programming. "This way," said tech specialist Nina Walsh, consulting her portable scanner. The central computer core should be 3 levels up, Section 7. Dr. Helen Burke ran alongside them, her medical equipment bouncing against her hip. In her backpack was a quantum virus they had developed, a piece of code designed to disrupt the neural control implants that enslaved millions of beings throughout the galaxy. The corridors they moved through were filled with conquered species from dozens of worlds. Morrison saw beings that might have once been artists or teachers or parents, all reduced to mindless servants of the Hegemony. Their blue-glowed eyes tracked the human intruders with mechanical precision, but beneath that artificial calm, Morrison thought he could see something else. Pain. "Contact ahead," Thompson reported over the comm. "Looks like a security checkpoint." Morrison and his team took cover behind a support beam as energy weapons fire filled the corridor. The Hegemony forces were well organized and disciplined, but they fought with the rigid tactics that had served them for thousands of years. Human desperation, Morrison had learned, was much more flexible. "Amy, can you patch into their communication system?" he asked Lieutenant Amy Collins, who was monitoring enemy transmissions on her portable unit. "Already on it, sir. They're coordinating through a local network, very structured command hierarchy." "Good. Send them this message. We're here to free you. The blue light in your eyes is a lie. Remember who you were before they took you." Collins looked at him with surprise. "Sir, that's going to tell them exactly where we are." "I'm counting on it." The effect was immediate and terrifying. Hegemony soldiers throughout the ship began to stumble, their perfect formations breaking as the human words triggered something deep in their suppressed memories. Some fell to their knees, clutching their heads as their original personalities fought against the control implants. Others simply stopped fighting entirely. "My God!" whispered Burke, watching a Hegemony soldier drop his weapon and stare at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "It's working. The message is triggering memory fragments that the implants can't fully suppress." But the chaos also attracted attention from deeper within the ship. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors as more advanced Hegemony forces moved to intercept the human boarding party. "Nina, how much further to the computer core?" 200 meters, sir. But there's a problem." Walsh pointed to her scanner readings. "The core is protected by some kind of energy barrier. We'll need to disable the security system first." "Where's the security control?" "That's the problem. It's in the opposite direction, about half a kilometer through heavily defended corridors." Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Mike, take half the team and get Nina to the computer core. Helen, you go with them. Upload that virus and free as many minds as you can." "What about the security system?" Thompson asked. "Commander Hayes and I will handle that. Ben, Amy, you're with us." Hayes grabbed Morrison's arm. "Jake, you're splitting our forces. We don't have enough people to secure 2 objectives." "I know, But if we don't try, all those enslaved beings stay enslaved forever. The team split up in the dark corridors of the alien ship. Morrison led Hayes, Carter, and Collins toward the security control center, while Thompson, Burke, Walsh, and the remaining Marines fought their way toward the computer core. The security center was defended by the most advanced hegemony forces Morrison had ever seen. These weren't conquered species with control implants. These were the original masters, the beings who had built this empire of slavery. They were tall, thin creatures with pale skin and eyes that burned with cruel intelligence. "So these are the architects," Morrison said, taking cover as energy beams scorched the air around him. "The ones who started all this." The battle for Security Center was brutal and desperate. The architects fought with weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, creating gravity wells and energy barriers that made conventional tactics useless. But Morrison and his team had something the architects didn't expect: the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. Lieutenant Carter threw himself into the path of an energy beam meant for Morrison. His young life ended in a flash of light. Commander Hayes took shrapnel from exploding console, her tactical expertise keeping him alive even as she bled from a dozen wounds. "Jake, get to the controls," she gasped, holding her side where alien metal had torn through her uniform. "I'll cover you." Morrison sprinted across the security center as energy weapons filled the air with deadly light. Behind him, Hayes and Collins fought desperately to keep the architects from stopping him. The control console was covered with symbols he didn't recognize, but the scanner Walsh had given him translated the alien text in real time. "Security barriers disabling," he announced over the comm. "Nina, you should have access to computer core now." Walsh's voice crackled back through the communicator. "Understood, sir. Beginning upload now." What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. The quantum virus spread through the hegemony's control network like wildfire, racing from ship to ship through their interconnected communication system. On every vessel in the fleet, enslaved beings suddenly found their minds freed from artificial control. The blue glow faded from millions of eyes. Across the command ship, hegemony soldiers stopped fighting and looked around in confusion. Some remembered their original names, their families, their homes. Others were too damaged by years of control to fully recover, but even they felt the weight of slavery lifting from their minds. "Sir, the virus is spreading beyond this ship," Walsh reported excitedly. "It's jumping through their quantum communication network. I'm reading liberation events throughout their entire fleet. But victory came at a terrible price. The architects, realizing that their empire was crumbling, activated the ship's self-destruct system. Warning alarms filled the corridors as the massive vessel began to tear itself apart. "All hands, evacuate immediately," Morrison ordered. Everyone back to the Defiance. The retreat through the collapsing ship was a nightmare of falling debris and failing life support systems. Morrison carried the wounded Hayes while Collins and the surviving Marines fought a rearguard action against a few architects still trying to stop them. They made it to the hangar bay just as the ship's structure began to buckle. The Defiance's engines were already warming up. Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez working miracles to get them ready for an emergency departure. "Tony, tell me you can get us out of here," Morrison called as he helped Hayes into the medical bay. "Maybe, sir. The jump drive is still overheated from our arrival, but I think I can manage one more jump. Might not be a smooth one. I'll take rough over dead." The Defiance launched from the dying command ship just as its reactors went critical. The explosion lit up local space like a small sun, but it also marked a moment when 10,000 years of galactic oppression began to crumble throughout the hegemony fleet. Free beings were turning on their former masters. Ship after ship went dark as liberated crews either destroyed their vessels or turned them against the architects. The perfect order that had conquered hundreds of worlds was dissolving into chaos. But the victory felt hollow as Morrison knelt beside Hayes in the medical bay. Her injuries were severe, and Dr. Burke was working frantically to save her life. "How many did we lose?" Morrison asked. Burke didn't look up from her patient. "Carter's gone. Rodriguez sacrificed himself to get the engines online. 3 of Thompson's Marines didn't make it out." Morrison closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him. Good people had died to free a galaxy, and he wasn't sure the price had been worth it. "Sir," Amy Collins said from the doorway, "you need to see this." Morrison followed her to the bridge, where the main screen showed the chaos spreading through the former hegemony fleet. Ships were breaking formation, some fleeing, others turning on each other as free beings fought their former masters. 3 months after the liberation of the hegemony fleet, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the rebuilt UHS Defiance, watching reports flood in from across the galaxy. The quantum virus had spread farther and faster than anyone had imagined possible, jumping to the hegemony's own communication networks to reach every corner of their empire. "Sir, we're receiving confirmation from the Andromeda sector," reported Lieutenant Amy Collins from her communication station. "The hegemony garrison at Kepler 186 has been overthrown by liberated Zephyrian survivors. They're requesting tactical support for their push toward the core worlds." Morrison nodded, making another mark on his star chart. In the past 12 weeks, over 300 former hegemony worlds had declared independence, their populations freed from the neural control implants that had turned them into slaves. The galactic uprising was beyond anything he had dared to hope for, but it had also drawn the attention of something far more dangerous than any fleet. "Captain," came the voice of Commander Zara over the intercom. The former hegemony officer had become one of Morrison's most trusted allies, her liberated ship fighting alongside the Defiance as they coordinated the growing rebellion. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures, moving toward the Sol system. Configuration unknown, but the power readings are significant. Morrison felt ice in his veins. They had known this moment would come eventually. When the architects realized that their empire was truly crumbling, they would make one final, desperate move to preserve their dominance. How massive are we talking about? The energy signature is approximately 50 times larger than their previous command ships. And, Captain, it's moving at speeds that should be physically impossible. Morrison called an emergency conference with his senior staff and allied commanders. The bridge of Defiance was crowded with beings from a dozen different species, all of them united by their shared hatred of the architects and their determination to remain free. Dr. Helen Burke had been studying captured architect technology for months, trying to understand the full scope of their capabilities. "Based on the energy readings, this isn't just a ship," she announced at the gathering. "It's some kind of stellar engineering project. The power requirements suggest they're drawing energy directly from multiple star systems. A weapon capable of destroying stars?" asked Commander Zara, her face pale with fear. "Worse than that. According to the technical specifications we recovered, it's a device capable of igniting any main sequence star. They could turn our sun into a weapon against us." The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. The architects weren't just planning to destroy Earth. They were planning to make an example that would terrify every rebel world in the galaxy back into submission. Sergeant Mike Thompson, now promoted to fill the gaps left by their losses, spoke up from the back of the room. "How long until this thing reaches Earth?" "At its current speed, maybe 6 days." Burke replied, "And how do we stop something that can destroy stars?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, the greatest military minds of the liberated galaxy struggled with a problem that seemed beyond solution. Morrison looked at the tactical displays, studying the approaching threat. The architect weapon was protected by a fleet of vessels unlike anything they had seen before. These weren't converted ships crewed by enslaved beings. These were purpose-built war machines operated by the original architects themselves. "We can't stop it," Morrison said finally. "Not directly, but maybe we don't have to." He stood up, moving to the holographic display that showed the weapon's projected path. "Burke, you said this thing draws power from star systems, right? What happens if we disrupt that power flow?" But in the middle of it all, something beautiful was happening. Liberated vessels were forming new formations, their crews working together despite having been enemies moments before. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were remembering how to cooperate instead of simply obeying. "Captain," came a new voice over the communication system. It was weak and uncertain, but it was speaking in accented English. This is Commander Zara of the vessel that was once designated Hegemony Cruiser 77 Alpha. We remember now. We remember who we were. Morrison picked up the communicator with shaking hands. Commander Zara, this is Captain Morrison. Welcome back to freedom. Captain Morrison, we have much to learn, much to remember, but we want to help. How we fight back. Morrison looked around at his surviving crew, seeing hope returning to their faces for the first time in months. The war wasn't over. There were still architect forces scattered throughout the galaxy, but for the first time, humanity wasn't fighting alone. Commander Zara, let me tell you about something we call guerrilla warfare. It's not pretty and it's not honorable, but it's very effective against enemies who think they're invincible. As the Defiance limped away from the battle zone, Morrison allowed himself a moment of hope. They had paid a terrible price, but they had accomplished something that no one thought possible. They had turned the hegemony's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The galaxy was waking up, and it was angry. In theory, it would shut down. But Captain, the engineering involved would require coordinating attacks on multiple star systems simultaneously. We'd need hundreds of ships, perfect timing, and a level of technical expertise that we simply don't have. What if we did have it? Nino Walsh, now serving as the Defiance's chief technical officer, leaned forward. Captain, are you suggesting we use the liberated hegemony fleets? They would have the technical knowledge, but coordinating something this complex would require the kind of communication network the hegemony used to control their empire. Morrison finished. The same network our virus used to spread freedom across the galaxy. The plan that emerged from the next 18 hours of frantic planning was either brilliant or completely insane. Morrison intended to use the hegemony's own quantum communication network to coordinate a galaxy-wide assault on the Architect weapons power sources. It would require perfect timing from hundreds of rebel fleets, precise technical knowledge of stellar engineering, and a level of trust between former enemies that had never existed in galactic history. It would also require someone to get close enough to the weapon itself to plant the disruption charges that would overload its power systems. "I'll take the Defiance," Morrison announced to his assembled allies. "We've had the most experience fighting these monsters. We know their tactics." "Jake, that's suicide," Commander Lisa Hayes said from her hospital bed. She was still recovering from her injuries, but she had insisted on participating in the planning sessions. That weapon will be protected by the best forces the Architects have left, which is why we'll have help. Morrison turned to address the crowded bridge. Every liberated fleet, every freed world, every being who wants to stay free is going to be part of this operation. We're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the right of every species in the galaxy to determine their own destiny. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, confirmation came from across the galaxy as liberated fleets pledged their support. Zephyrian survivors, freed hegemony cruisers, mining vessels converted to warships, and civilian craft carrying volunteers from 100 different species. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was united in a common cause. The coordination required for the operation was staggering. Each rebel fleet had to be positioned near specific star systems, armed with technical specifications for disrupting stellar energy feeds, and synchronize the act at precisely the same moment. Morrison found himself at the center of it all, coordinating with beings he had never met, speaking languages he didn't recognize, all united by their determination to remain free. "Captain, this is Commander Vex of the liberated mining fleet Tau Ceti," came one transmission. "We're in position at the primary power nexus, ready to execute on your signal. This is Captain Morrison. Stand by for coordinated strike." Similar confirmations came from across the galaxy. The former hegemony communication network, once used to coordinate oppression, was now being used to organize the largest military operation in galactic history. But as the Architect weapon approached Earth, Morrison realized that their enemy had one final surprise. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the weapon itself," Amy Collins reported, her voice shaking. The main screen flickered to life, showing a figure that made everyone on the bridge step back in shock. It appeared to be human, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was metallic gray, its eyes glowed with cold blue light, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of millennia. "Captain Morrison of the species designated human," it said. "I am the Prime Architect. the first consciousness to achieve perfect order through the elimination of chaos. Your actions have disrupted 10,000 years of galactic peace. Morrison stepped forward, his jaw clenched with anger. Peace? You call slavery peace. Order. Purpose. The elimination of the inefficiency and suffering caused by individual will. Your species and others like it represent chaos, unpredictability, the random elements that prevent true harmony. And you think you have the right to decide that for everyone? I am not deciding. I am correcting. This weapon will destroy your star system as an example to all rebel worlds. Order will be restored. The transmission ended, leaving Morrison staring at a blank screen. Around him, his crew and allies processed what they had just learned. The hegemony wasn't just an empire. It was a vision of a single consciousness that had decided the galaxy needed to be perfected. All fleets, this is Morrison. You heard that thing. It's not going to stop with Earth. If we don't end this here and now, it will hunt down every free world in the galaxy until there's nothing left but slaves. He took a deep breath, looking around at the faces of beings from dozens of species, all of them ready to die for freedom. Execute Operation Liberation. All fleets, all targets, all at once. Show this thing what chaos really looks like. Across the galaxy, rebel fleets opened fire on the stellar energy feeds that power the Architect weapon. The attacks were perfectly coordinated, striking at the same instant despite being separated by thousands of light years. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The massive weapon shuddered as its power systems overloaded, energy cascading through its hull in brilliant displays of light. But it wasn't enough. The weapon was too well built, too heavily protected. It continued its approach toward Earth, though slower now and clearly damaged. All right, people. Morrison said to his crew as the Defiance accelerated toward the wounded giant. Time for one last crazy stunt. Nina, are those disruption charges ready? Ready as they'll ever be, sir, but getting close enough to plant them. Leave that to me. As the Defiance approached the Architect weapon, Morrison realized that this was what everything had been leading to. All the running battles, all the desperate gambits, all the sacrifices his people had made. It had all been preparing them for this moment. The war for galactic freedom was about to be decided in the cold darkness of space above Earth, and humanity was about to show the galaxy that some things were worth any price to preserve. The Architect weapon loomed above Earth like a mechanical moon, its damaged hull still pulsing with enough energy to ignite humanity's sun. Captain Jake Morrison guided the UHS Defiance through the debris field left by the galaxy-wide assault, his ship small and insignificant against the massive construct that threatened his world. Around him, the combined fleets of liberated species fought desperately against the Architect defenders. Ships from dozens of worlds flew together in formations that would have been impossible months ago, their crews united by their shared determination to remain free. Captain, we're receiving multiple distress signals, reported Lieutenant Amy Collins from her communications station. The liberated cruiser New Kepler is taking heavy damage, and the Zephyrian squadron reports 50% casualties. Morrison gripped his command chair as the ship shook from a near miss. The Architect defenders were unlike any enemy they had faced before. These weren't enslaved beings fighting against their will. These were the original oppressors, fighting with the cold efficiency of machines. Sir, I'm reading power fluctuations throughout the weapon, announced Tech Specialist Nina Walsh from her engineering station. Our coordinated attack damaged their energy systems, but they're rerouting power from secondary sources. How long until they can fire? Maybe 30 minutes, sir. Morrison looked at the tactical display, watching the chaotic battle raging around the weapon. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, but it might not be enough. The Architect weapon was still functional, and once it fired, Earth would become another dead world in their catalog of conquest. All ships, this is Morrison. We're going in. Cover us for as long as you can. Jake, that's insane even by your standards, came the voice of Commander Zara over the comm. Her ship had taken significant damage, but she was still fighting alongside the human vessel that had freed her from slavery. Insane is what we do best, Morrison replied. Nina, how close do we need to get to plant those disruption charges? Physical contact, sir. We'll need to dock with the weapon's hull and manually place the charges at specific points. But, Captain, the energy discharge when this thing fails. We won't survive it. Morrison looked around at his crew, seeing fear and determination in equal measure on their faces. They had followed him through months of impossible battles, had trusted him when conventional wisdom said they should surrender. Now he was asking them to make the ultimate sacrifice. "I'm not ordering anyone to come with me on this one," he said quietly. "This is volunteer only. But someone has to plant those charges, or Earth dies and the rebellion dies with it." One by one, every member of his crew stepped forward. Collins, Walsh, Thompson, even Dr. Helen Burke from her medical station. They were ready to die for the principle that no one had the right to decide the fate of an entire galaxy. "All right, then," Morrison said, feeling pride and sadness in equal measure. "Let's go save the universe." The final approach to the architect weapon was like flying into the heart of a storm. Energy beams lanced out from defensive installations, filling space with deadly light. The Defiance's shields flared and overloaded as they pushed through the defensive perimeter. "Hull breach on Deck 3, Thompson reported from damage control, sealing emergency bulkheads. "Life support is failing on the lower decks," Burke added. "We've got maybe 10 minutes of air left in the damaged sections." Morrison pushed the ship harder, using every trick he had learned in months of fighting impossible odds. The architect weapon grew larger and larger on their view screen, its surface covered with installations that looked more like a city than a weapon. "There," Walsh said, pointing to a section of hull near the weapon's primary energy coupling. "That's where we need to place the charges. If we can overload the power coupling, the entire system will cascade failure." The Defiance came alongside the massive construct with a grinding of metal on metal. Morrison could feel the ship's hull buckling under the strain, but they were close enough now to deploy the boarding party. "Nina, Helen, you're with me. Mike, maintain position and be ready to get us out of here if this works." "And if it doesn't work?" Thompson asked. "Then tell Earth what we tried to do." The three of them suited up in environmental gear and made their way through the ship's airlock onto the surface of the architect weapon. The construct was so massive that standing on its hull was like standing on the surface of a small planet. All around them, the battle continued to rage. Morrison could see liberated ships fighting desperately against architect defenders, their hulls glowing with weapons fire. Some were winning, others were dying, but all of them were fighting for the right to determine their own destiny. "This way," Burke said, consulting her scanner. "The primary power coupling should be about 200 meters in this direction." They ran across the alien hull, their magnetic boots keeping them anchored to the surface, while energy beams from the ongoing battle lit up the space around them. The power coupling, when they found it, was a massive installation that pulsed with contained stellar energy. "My God," Walsh whispered. "They're actually channeling the power of stars through this thing. The engineering involved. Can you disrupt it?" "Yes. But, Captain, when this thing goes, it's going to release energy equivalent to a supernova. Nothing within 1,000 kilometers is going to survive." Morrison activated his communicator. "Mike, this is Morrison. Get the ship out of here. Get as far away as you can." "Sir, we're not leaving you.